So this is an outstanding question because military medicine and tactical combat casualty care is largely overlooked when we talk about the tactics and strategic implications of what happens on a battlefield. But it absolutely matters. So I'm glad this question was asked because even I seem to have been ignoring it for the last year, but I do want to talk about it. Everything from battlefield sanitization to wound care to getting troops to a field hospital plays a major part in the modern day army. And those militaries that can take advantage of the benefits of good tactical combat casualty care on the battlefield tend to do better in warfare. In World War I, U.S. injured soldiers could be expected to wait hours and hours before being evacuated to a field hospital just a few miles away. During the war in Afghanistan, there's a huge contrast. An injured U.S. military personnel could be evacuated to a U.S. military hospital in Landstuhl, Germany, or even back to the U.S. in a day or two. And I'll talk about what is called the golden hour in a little bit. Now, by all accounts, Ukraine is much better at military medicine than Russia. Ukrainian forces are well trained in tactical combat casualty care because we were training them in Hohenfels in such capability. We helped them in their field hospitals, not me personally because I worked in field artillery logistics, but our very brilliant medical personnel, our medics, docs, everyone helped them learn how to do field medicine and tactical combat casualty care. And there's various levels of it, with level 1 being your self-care and buddy care, level 2, the field hospital, level 3 being a larger theater hospital, etc. So the Ukrainians learned this over the last 8 years. These are the guidelines of tactical combat casualty care are a set of pre-field hospital guidelines that were developed by the U.S. military in the 90s and perfected over the courses of Iraq and Afghanistan. And the U.S. military medical practitioners found that 87% of preventable battlefield deaths occurred before they got to the hospital. So if we could focus on those things, then we can save more lives. And therefore, the tactical combat casualty care guidelines came about. It focuses heavily on blood loss and hemorrhaging, which is combated by applying tourniquets, what we used to call Israeli bandages. I think they're called something else now, but tourniquets specifically. Tourniquets. And that is a huge lifesaver. The hemostatic dressings, which I think is what the Israeli bandages were, clamps to stop blood loss at field hospitals or by medics, all of this was included in the supplies the U.S. has been giving Ukraine, not just recently, but over the last 8 years. This is along with the body armor they've received as well. The Western advisors have been pushing for the use of whole blood in forward settings as well, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as how it's helped Ukrainians survive on the battlefield. One reason for Ukraine's medical advantage is that they were welcoming of all of this aid and this training from the U.S. because while the U.S. is very good at warfare, I would dare to say that there is no country better on the face of the earth in the history of the world that is better at tactical combat casualty care and field medicine when it comes to warfare, period. So the U.S. is happy to train our Western partners in Ukraine included in that. Now, Russian forces, on the other hand, lack medical training on that level, as well as the supplies. There's a recent video that I shared with you a while back that showed Russian officers telling the conscripts to purchase tampons to help their girlfriends and mothers and wives send them tampons to plug bullet wounds. That is a humongously stupid piece of advice because tampons not only don't stop bleeding, they don't apply pressure, they also draw the blood out because of the nature of how they work. It is a stupid tactic, but it is what Russia has been saying to do. Russia has been suffering from shortage of military medical staffs for years because they just aren't paid very well relative to what a doctor in the economy can make. There's no incentive to being a military doctor in Russia. Most of them are leaving Russia. A lot of the intelligent doctors are finding ways to leave the country so as not to be drafted into the military. So the problem where Russia is facing is multifaceted. They don't have doctors. They don't have supplies. The corruption has ate into the supplies. Their lower level forces aren't trained as well, and it's causing a big problem in casualties for Russia. Russian morale is driven a lot by this casualty care. where they've seen that because Russian men are leaving the country and doctors are leaving, not having adequate medical care on the battlefield is really driving really bad morale. They've shown videos where they're having Soviet era first aid kits with Soviet era medications inside of them. This is 30-year-old stuff, if not older. And they just don't have the modern equipment on the front line like Ukraine has been provided by the West. Better military medicine matters on the battlefield for a few reasons. First, having better medicine obviously saves lives, and that's a huge benefit. And that means that because you are saving more lives, you can bring more people to the fight, and they will likely be healthier not only at the start of the fight, but during the fight, and if they are wounded. All else being equal, you're likely to receive treatment that allows them to return to duty, or at least return to be able to train, or at least be alive to tell the story of intelligence, etc., what they've known. Second, having better medicine likely means that you keep better unit cohesion. Rather than being sent home or worse, dying, injured soldiers can be treated and returned to their unit, and those social bonds, that camaraderie stays. So you're not having to retrain troops, and often wounded troops can be redesignated to train other troops once they heal, rather than being dead and not being a service to anyone. So good medical care is critical in unit cohesion, and finally that plays into morale. Knowing that you and your fellow soldiers are going to receive good medical care in the event of an injury or an illness will make you more willing to fight and take more risks and be willing to put yourself in harm's way because you know you can be cared for. Now, another disparity that we see between Russia and Ukraine, and this kind of plays into what you've been discussing, is the disparity in evacuation systems. Russia has lost thousands and thousands of vehicles and is now relying on ragtag vehicles. We've seen the trains full of like Isuzu Troopers and Toyota 4Runners and stuff like that going to the front line. Those are not very adequate vehicles for casualty evacuation. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians are using M113s, which is an armored personnel carrier, for evacuation purposes. These are the APCs with the Red Cross usually on them. This is great for getting casualties out in a small arms or even artillery fight because they're protected from bullets and shrapnel. It's very fast at 42 miles an hour for a tracked vehicle, and it can hold 4 casualties and up to 6, but if you want to keep the 2 medics in the back helping treat, it's 4 casualties with 2 medics. Now, the U.S. and Western allies have given them roughly 750 of these since 2014. Incidentally, Russia has destroyed about 40 of them, and the U.S. is backfilling with American Bradleys. The Germans have provided Martyrs, and the Swedes are providing CV-90s for this purpose. Now, the disparity between tactical casualty care between Russia and Ukraine is large because of the 5-to-1 ratio of Russian to Ukrainian deaths in Bakhmut. You can see this is clearly playing out. The U.S. created the standard of the golden hour for getting troops off the battlefield to a hospital within 1 hour, this to save their lives. This was only possible for the U.S., though, because they had air and ground superiority and could use helicopters in Iraq and Afghanistan. But it's much harder for the Ukrainians right now in a peer conflict with Russia. The current time from wound to hospital is about 2 hours for Ukrainians right now. This is why Ukraine has adopted a field blood system at the recommendation of U.S. military experts, where transfusions can begin quickly. As I said, blood loss is the most likely cause of death for soldiers on the battlefield. But this 2 hours is a far cry from the 36 to 48 hours that we've been seeing from the Russians. We've seen drone footage of wounded Russians writhing in pain for hours without even level 1 buddy care. Their own buddies aren't really even coming to their aid. They're trying to save their own lives, which is incredibly difficult when you start to go into shock. And then if you're talking about 36 to 48 hours, we're talking about infection that easily sets in over time. And this is why we're seeing high casualties on the Russian side, because they just don't have the capability, or really even what I would call the give a crap about stopping casualties, providing adequate medical care, getting soldiers from the front line to the rear echelons for health care purposes and to save their lives. And it's causing a brain drain within their ranks, because as soldiers who have fought the war die, they have no benefit to provide training or feedback or any kind of after action reviews to the Russian Ministry of Defense for them to learn from their mistakes. So big problem for Russia, but I think that's largely why we don't see a lot of medical care from Russia. It's just not existent relative to the Western trained and equipped Ukrainians.